Welcome to the Legal CFO.
Welcome to the show where clarity meets profitability. This is the Legal CFO with Ryan Kimler, the founder of Net Profit CFO. If you're a law firm owner looking to get a handle on your finances, grow your bottom line, and finally take control of your numbers, you're in the right place. Each episode, Ryan breaks down the business side of law with straightforward strategies to help your firm run smarter, earn more, and scale with confidence. I'm Lisa Mosby, and today we're talking about law firm profit margins. Ryan will explain what different margin ranges actually say about a firm's financial health, why some margins quietly signal trouble, and how firms can realistically improve margins over time without burning out the owner or the team. Welcome back, Ryan. I'm so great to be here.
Yes, same, and excited to dive into today's topic.
I know I'm excited about this one, just because I'm nosy and I'm a curious person. And I always wonder about how do businesses make money? When you review a law firm's financials, what does a healthy profit margin usually indicate about how the firm is operating behind the scenes?
So I will say it does kind of depend sometimes, and there's two different stages that I would put businesses and or law firms into. One of them would be if you're optimizing. If you're trying to optimize the business and really become efficient, your profit margin is going to be higher than if you're in a growth phase. It takes money to grow. That's just how it is. There's no way getting around it. And so when I analyze things, I love to look at a percentage. Love to look at, okay, it's great. We could have profits of $1 million 2 years ago and $1.2 million last year. So it increased. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Without more information, we don't really know, right? We don't have context of, well, did the business grow in sales? What kind of a percentage is that of the business? If it's a $10 million business, say 2 years ago, and they had 1 million in profits, that's a 10% profit margin. That would not be very good. And that is not healthy. So I love to look at the numbers. I love to see the real numbers, but I also love to look at percentages as well and see how efficient is the business, because that's really what the profit percentage really tells you.
And Ryan, at what point does a profit margin start to signal risk or instability, even if revenue looks strong?
So that depends on business size too. But in general, I would say if you're single digits in profit margin, so that would be like a 8%, 7%, 5%, or even the low double digits, 10, 11, 12, any profit margin that's in that kind of a range, that signals to me, there could be trouble ahead, right? I think if you make a couple of different decisions, that number could easily swing by those percentage points, right? And we definitely don't want to be in a situation where our business has a loss. So those single digit profit margins really make me nervous.
And why do law firm owners misjudge their true profit margin when they first look at their numbers?
Yes. One of the big things is how they pay themselves and where that is categorized. And that can be complicated. So, depending on if you're on payroll or not, right? Could be a very, very quick way to misjudge what your true profit margin is. If you're, a business owner, and let's say you have your LLC and the whole end of the month, you get down and your profit margin is 25%, but you're not included in payroll. That might look healthy on paper, but if you take what you pay yourself out of it, that could easily drop you down into 10, 15% profits. And so again, whether or not your payroll is calculated in is a really easy way that I've seen owners just misjudge where their profit margin truly is.
And then, Ryan, how do overhead staffing, structure, and pricing decisions tend to show up in margin performance over time?
Yeah, it's all fit in there, right? So to get down to profits, we've got to have our sales minus all of our expenses. And our sales are obviously driven by price, which is part of what you asked about, right? If we kept the same number of clients and the same work, but our prices were $10 higher, we'd be bringing in more money, right? And so that definitely increases the top line. And then on the payroll, marketing, overhead, every decision that we make in those categories really ends up impacting where our profit margins come out, right? Um, a bad hire, for example, someone that we don't get a great return on and maybe doesn't fit culturally and they don't do the work that we expect them to do. Those are all things that could end up affecting profit margins. So everything that you listed there is definitely in the equation and has a direct impact on what our profitability is as a business.
And I'm kind of curious, what margin patterns do you commonly see in firms that feel busy and successful, but are still struggling financially?
Yeah, growing firms typically have growing profits as well. That's just kind of how it goes. I think it's very hard to keep the same level of revenue and increase profitability at least consistently over time, right? So, in other words, it's very hard to say we're a $5 million law firm and we're just going to stay at $5 million, but we expect increased profitability over time, right? That means you're expecting to continue to get more efficient, more efficient, more efficient, and eventually that gets harder and harder and harder to do. Uh, there's only so much efficiency you can build into a business. I mean, I do think there's, everybody has room that they can improve. But growing as a law firm, growing that top line is definitely a pattern that I see that's going to contribute to profitability as long as we're doing it in the right way. And so I like to see the trend that, we're not shrinking. We're also not staying stagnant. Um, it's really hard to do that and make more money.
I'm going to have you stretch on this one. How should profit margins evolve as a firm grows? Like from your early stages, is there an expected number the first year, two, three, maybe 1 through 5, and then into a more mature operation, maybe years 5 through 10, and then over 10 years? If you're not in this certain range, you're not in a healthy financial structure. Can you give us a lowdown kind of on that?
Yeah, so let's start with the solos. First of all, as a solo, I think everyone's job is to get to $300,000 worth of work, right? If you're going to be a solo, that's going to put you in a position where you can make that first hire. And while you're a solo, you should be keeping your operating costs low, right? Not a lot of staff, not a big office space. And so you should be really, really profitable on that solo kind of book of business, if you will. Again, it might take a couple years to get to the point where you're generating that kind of work more than $300,000. But I think that's really the first step in getting to both a kind of a where you can be independent and have a strong income as a solo owner. I think that's really the first step. Then from there, as you progress in the years and as you grow a small team, again, your smaller teams, I think you've got to prove out the model. I love to see my owners on payroll and 20 to 30, maybe even a little bit higher profit margin percentage. So that means every dollar that we bring in, we're keeping 20 cents, 30 cents, maybe even up to 35 cents, something like that. And again, that's with the owner on payroll. So I think a good rule of thumb there is, set your lifestyle, right? So if it's $150,000 a year that you've got to have to pay all your bills and all that kind of stuff, put that on payroll, right? So that doesn't change no matter what. That's an expense. You're going to pay it and you're not going to get yourself in trouble personally. And then as the business does better as an owner, you can distribute additional money kind of like as a bonus. And you can use that money, to take vacations, plan trips, maybe upgrade a car or something like that if you want to do that, right? That would be more lifestyle money, right? You don't need it to survive. You don't need it for retirement. I would say retirement should come out of your wages as well, right? But again, even paying yourself $150,000, you should be trying to hit that 20, 25, 30% profit margin at your firm. If you're not anywhere near that, I would say the first thing you should look at is pricing. That's the first big lever that you can pull that can make a massive difference. And then as the business grows, there's going to be periods of growth where your profit margin probably does dip under 20%. But the purpose of having a strong profit margin to start before we grow is we know that it takes money to grow, right? And so instead of starting at 8 or 9 or 10% and the dip takes you down to, well, now we're break even, or now we're losing money and we're tapping into our reserves, instead of that, we're still making money. It might just be, instead of keeping 20 cents of every dollar, we're keeping 10 while we're in this growth phase, while we have some additional some additional expenses. Maybe we have to expand into bigger office space, and maybe we have to take on, say, 6 offices, and we really only needed 2, right? So we've got some extra space, some inefficiency there, right? Those kind of things happen. But if you start from a strong profit percentage, right, then there's some room for error, right? There's some wiggle room there where we're not dipping down and getting into a break even or losing money situation. So again, as time goes on, I think the most important thing is to have the model built out, really prove the model, prove that we can make 20 or 30% net income, and then go add more work, right? I always ask my clients and kind of pose it in this way, that if we're going to go and add $1 million more worth in cases, or $1 million more worth of work, that is a lot of work, right? To get out and generate it, sell it, deliver it, manage the people that deliver it, right? Would you rather keep $80,000, or would you rather be $200,000 or $300,000, right? For the effort that takes. That's kind of how I always word it and propose it.
And I'm sure you've probably worked with some firms who were surprised at how thin their margins really were. When you implement some of these strategies, does any particular company come to mind? I don't want you to share who they are, but what do you remember about the changes you made, and how you saved them from going out of business because you were able to dive deep into those books and take a look at it?
Yes, a couple companies do come to mind. And when you're so both of these companies, when they came in contact with me, they were in single digit profits. They were both 7-figure firms, so over $1 million a year in sales, and single digit profits. And neither one of them were in like a massive growth phase at the time. Neither one of them were doubling office space, or we're upgrading our technology because we've grown, or we have 2 or 3 new employees that aren't fully up to, none of that was happening, right? So single digit profits. One was at about 6.5%. One was at 8, 9, somewhere in there. In those types of scenarios, usually it's more than one change that needs to be made. In this case, in both these firms, we needed to change pricing. They were priced too low, and also had not moved prices in 7 or 8 years. And number 2, also needed to just change efficiency. Not, really diving in and figuring out which employees are producing, which ones aren't. Also about, some outside counsel deals where they were working with some other lawyers outside the firm that just weren't set up in a good way either. Very, very high fee splits. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. And very, very high hourly rates as well. And when you have high hourly rates, plus also they were not super efficient. So, the firm would get billed for 2.5 hours and only put on the client's bill an hour and a half. When you have things like that, you might think that you're paying somebody $100 an hour, but realistically, it's more like 175 or 200 when we're inefficient in those ways. So yeah, and in those cases, multiple changes have to be made. And it takes some time sometimes to turn those kind of trends around. It's not going to happen overnight. You didn't get to this place overnight, right? Where your business became inefficient and wasn't making the money that you wanted it to. So it didn't happen overnight. It's not going to be fixed overnight. Um, but yes, both of those scenarios, lots of changes need to be made, and a lot of times in more than one area.
Yeah, what I'm noticing is that the fastest improvement comes through probably fee structure. What area takes the longest to correct?
The area that takes the longest for sure is, well, there's two things, but first one that comes to mind is in your people and the habits that they have and the processes that you've had in place before. Especially like as a great example, if your firm has a little bit of a collections problem where we're billing the work, we're doing the work, we're billing it, and then our clients aren't paying us in a timely manner. um, a lot of times that is because of internal habits that we have on how we review the bills, how often we follow up with clients. Those kind of things take a long time to fix, especially if it's a problem that's built up over time. Um, and again, it takes time to change habits. So that's one of the things that takes a long time to fix, and it can be significant. I've had firms that I've started working with that have receivables due from clients that are equal to 3 or 4 or 5 months of billables. So it can be very, very significant. Now that built over time. That did not happen overnight. That was over the last, couple of years. But the total balance that was due from clients, if we brought it all in the door tomorrow, would have been like 3 or 4, 5 months of revenue in total, right? So those amounts can be really, really large, and a lot of those fees that are older end up going to collections, and you get pennies on the dollar, and it can be a real problem, right? Second thing that takes a long time to change is if you're on annual contracts. So that could be an annual contract for research, for legal research. A lot of times negotiating that or getting out of that can take a long time to change. Leases can take a long time to change, and really sometimes that it's completely out of the control of the firm, right? And so sometimes in those scenarios, you know, your options can be limited, but there are some mitigating factors that we can do to try to, again, just help, right? And help make that a smaller percentage of your expenses, if you're stuck in that kind of a situation. But those are the two things that take the longest to turn around or change.
Brian, where I want to wrap this up today is your final thoughts on how owners can focus on that profit margin to help the firm owners, members, all feel calmer, making more confident decisions instead of reacting to short-term cash swings, which tends to happen more often than not.
Yeah, I think the place to start is really knowing where you're starting from. So, go back to last quarter's numbers or the end of last year's numbers and really figure out those percentages, right? Not looking at just dollars. What are the percentages and where are we starting from? And then now, as you've listened to this episode, and I've kind of given you guys some target percentages to move towards, now you start making progress towards those targets, right? How do we get to 30% profits where 30 cents on the dollar we're keeping, right? Um, and reviewing those expenses really comes next, right? After we've reviewed where we are, review pricing, review those expenses, and start moving the needle towards how do we get towards that 30% or 30 cents on the dollar kind of a number.
Well, folks, you heard it here. To feel calmer, it just takes a little review, and Ryan's available to do that for you. Thank you so much for your insights today.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And, folks, thank you for listening to the Legal CFO with Ryan Kimler. If you're ready to get financial clarity for your law firm, visit netprofitcfo.com to learn more about working with Ryan and his team. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe, share it with another law firm who may be struggling right now, and come on back next time. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.